your channel now. So which one do
Yeah.
we use?
Okay, so that's looking better. So the live stream should be coming through to here now.
I do appreciate you dedicating so many videos to me on your channel, though. That's awesome.
Okay, I think we are now live in all sorts of places where we would like to be. Let me see if I can find a YouTube link. We're live on
So
there.
if I go to live,
Just bear with us, everyone.
there we go. All
You
right,
got it?
I see the one that's live. Yep. Let me
Okay.
just quickly share that.
Sorry, everyone. That was a bit strange.
It was all right. Yay. Okay. Did we? Everybody made it over. All right. Cool.
Okay. I'm just going to assume that everything just works from from here on in. That's always the most
Sure.
exciting way. Okay, good. Good, good, good.
Though I do see it buffering.
I'm not going to worry too hard about that. Okay, apologies for that. We had a little bit of mess around. These things happen, and but hey, here we are. Here we are in the center of technology and exciting futuristic things. I am here this evening talking with Pete Brown from Microsoft, from actual Microsoft. It's amazing. I remember when the first few times we had a conversation, it was this whole thing where I'm actually talking to somebody who has a Microsoft email address. It was that exciting because it seemed to be such an impenetrable, wall of distortion about the possibility of getting to speak to somebody in the company. So
I'm thrilled to be speaking to the Robin Vincent. So I think that's better than an at Microsoft.com.
oh, well, bless you. That's very kind. Let's see where I am. Make sure I can see the chat. Good, working good. Good to see people there. Thanks for coming along. This is an unexpected live stream. Really, it came about because I'm not really, I don't have my fingers on the pulse of Windows and computers anymore. I used to. If you're not familiar with me, I spent sort of 20 years in the industry building computers for music production. So building computers for Windows-based studios, starting early on with Cubase and Logic systems on the PC, Giga Studio systems. I built systems for Mark Knopfler. I built systems for David Arnold, for George Martin, lots of different people, and also regular people too. So I was very much enmeshed in that whole how do we wrangle Windows into becoming a decent and professional music production platform. And we did that, absolutely. And I've been doing that for, as I say, for about 20 odd years until about now 5 years ago, perhaps. The situation became basically that computers got to the point where they really didn't need my help anymore. Things largely worked, and so the idea of someone building a boutique system for your studio became less and less important. And so I was finding that I had fewer systems to build, and decided that it's probably time I started doing something else. So I sort of shifted and pivoted now towards other music technology things, modular synthesizers, while still writing about music technology, writing about software. And I also a very keen user of the Microsoft Surface as a platform. There is one here. That's my Surface Pro
Yep.
9. And I still write and talk about that. But my involvement in how Windows works has lessened, and so I'm less up to date than I was. However, a few years ago, I got the opportunity to try out the Surface Pro X, which was not the first Windows ARM computer, but sort of a big push into that environment of using ARM processors rather than Intel processors. And that's kind of what this is all about. At that time, it was interesting, but there were not a whole lot of things that worked on it. But I was able to, to show a few bits and pieces that could work, and you could see the potential of something down the line. But at that particular time, it wasn't really ready to become a music making platform as such. Coming up to today, very recently we had this big keynote conference from Qualcomm about their Snapdragon processors, and within it was this little reveal right at the end about some very exciting things which Microsoft are doing on that platform within Windows 11 that we at some point we never believed it would ever going to be possible. And so it's very, very exciting to see this technological development happening right now, right in front of us. And we're here really, I'm here with Pete to talk about what that could mean and what that is. So that's our introduction. Pete, I know you work on all of these things. In fact, you've been sort of like our man in Microsoft, fighting for musicians and producers, doing all the business to try to get this enormous operating system, because it has to run most of the world, and our little part of this large world of business and entertainment and gaming and all these other things, we're a tiny little wedge, tiny little thing. So to get attention to what we're doing is difficult, I think, at the best of times. So you've been our man in there, just putting our case forward, which has been brilliant, and it's been really interesting watching and seeing how Windows has developed as a serious platform for audio production. And it's great to be in a position where we're talking about it again, because something new and exciting has happened. So sadly, I can just ramble on for ages, but I don't want to do that. So I want to punt it over to you for the moment. So introduce yourself to us to start with, and then let's talk about what's happened.
Okay. So thanks, Robin. Thanks for having me on here. It's really fun. I'm glad we're able to sort through all the streaming stuff with YouTube here. I've known you for a very long time, back when you were first starting with Surface and had your show on YouTube, and then you've been on with Nick Batt and folks a number of times, offering information on modular synths, which is something else we could rat hole about if we really wanted to. I love modular stuff, but we'll spend the rest of the day just talking about that. My background in this is, let's see how far back we want to go here. But when I was in high school, I worked in a music store selling D50s and later Korg M1s and W30s and all the great synthesizers and stuff at the time. And that's really kind of where I got my start in that. I was just a really bad keyboard player. And I went there and I bought a used Juno 106. Nice. And I was messing around with it. And they were like, "Do you want to work here?" And so I was like, "Yeah, sure, I would love to." And I was like 17, right? So it was 17 and being able to afford a Juno 106. By the way, this is back when everybody was dumping them for pennies because they weren't cool, they weren't digital. So I worked there for a while, and that's also when I started getting exposed to like MIDI sequencing and stuff, not just on the workstations, but also I had a Commodore computer at home, and I got a Passport MIDI interface. And for anybody who's old enough to remember Windows 95, Windows 95 shipped with a MIDI file called passport.mid. That was a very famous tune that everybody knew, that just kind of shipped with that. That was done by the same people who did that Commodore 64 Passport MIDI interface back in the late 80s. So it was kind of like interesting to have those things tied together.
Funny enough, I did, just as an aside, I ran one of my first gigs off a Commodore 64 with an electro music research sequencer, I seem to remember, running into a Roland E20 with probably that same MIDI interface, thinking about it. It took about 3 minutes to load each song, so I had to talk, talk a lot between each one, which was great. But people are saying my audio is a bit low. I don't think if there's anything I can do about that.
I mean, it sounds okay to me. I don't know if I'm also low or what, but yours sounds fine to me.
I will keep close to the microphone.
But people are saying it's faint. Jim, is mine all right? Because that would be super weird if mine was fine and Robin's was not. But anyway, I guess we'll keep going. Robin, you just have to be loud. You just have to be loud. So I'll fast forward a whole bunch from that. I eventually started working at Microsoft 15 years ago, and I've always had an interest in the music space and working with musicians and everything. And I saw it was something that we hadn't paid any attention to. So kind of over the past oh, I don't know, 10 plus years or so of working there, I've been trying to I started out by being kind of the face of Microsoft to a lot of the music companies because one of our hobbies at Microsoft is to reorganize all the teams every year or so. So you're never dealing with the same people 2 years in a row. So I thought this, if any industry needs a consistent face that they can ask questions to, it's this one. So I started presenting myself as that. So even though I moved between different organizations and stuff in the company, I would still know who I could talk to internal from engineering and stuff like that. These days, I actually work in Windows engineering, and so I do the partner stuff for musicians, but also we'll talk about MIDI services here in a little bit. That's 60% of the code that's in that is code that I wrote. That's for MIDI
Nice.
2.0 and all the stuff we're doing. So it's nice to actually be able to contribute to things like that as well. And these days, I really am just trying to bubble up the needs of musicians when you're right. There's so much other stuff that you have to compete with in a general purpose operating system, because something that you do for gamers can hurt real-time audio for
Mm.
musicians, and so we're always trying to like balance those things, and I'm trying to push those agendas forward. And so that's what I spend a lot of time doing these days is what do we need to do for musicians? Who do I need to work with to make that happen? And how can I help keep us from backsliding on anything that would make it worse for musicians in the future if we did a particular thing for, say, like GPU or something like that?
Yeah.
And I there are a lot of like-minded people in Microsoft. It's if you think about the typical computer science graduates, there are a lot of musicians who are computer science graduates, and we have a lot of computer science graduates at Microsoft. So, we get a lot of support from people like that, especially a lot of them in Surface, who really want to make sure that this is really good for musicians as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, without sort of dwelling on the past too much, I mean, I know people like to, there's always a Windows Apple comparison, and people like to knock things. But I mean, I found, I started, um, running music software on a PC like 30 years ago. It's never been a problem. If even in the early days when you set your mind to it, you can get these things, to work. It's never been a major problem. There's been perhaps a lack of consistency, a lack of smoothness, but a lot of the troubles that I've worked through on particularly the Surface platform and such like has been much more hardware related. It's been much more to do with how do we get a fast enough connection to our audio interface, and how
Mm-hmm.
do we get the processors to behave in such a way that they give us all of their power to the road when we need it most. Those have been the sorts of areas. It's never really been an issue with the operating system as such, because there's always been ASIO drivers or other bits and pieces that you put together to make the system work as a whole. Then I know there are things on Apple that we would like, perhaps, and some of that is what we're looking at now, really, and that's what makes it interesting. Because I mean, we've had this conversation in the past. I remember, there's sort of been points where you just think, why cannot all of this stuff just be built into the OS?
Right.
You have a piece of hardware that you need to talk to a piece of software, and there has to be a third party company who creates a driver in order for those two things to communicate. And you kind of feel that we're putting too many things in the way between these two things, and surely there must be a faster, cleaner, nicer way for these things to communicate with each other. And I suppose that's something that is always in the air for discussion, but it's never actually something which has prevented us from doing the job of making music on the platform.
Right.
However, when we come to a new architecture, as we are with the Snapdragon with ARM, it's not quite the same, because we've been running on Intel processors and AMD processors for decades, and we're very much at home with that. And what we for those who aren't very particularly technically minded, Windows has to be written for a processor type, if you like, so which has been x86 for a long time. I'm going to give them these terrible definitions for things, but as a general flavor, right, there's been a type of processor which is the
Yeah.
Intel one primarily, and window, that your code has to be written for that processor to essentially understand it. With Snapdragon, what we're finding is that these are phenomenally useful, fast, efficient processors that Windows can now start to use, because Windows has been recompiled to talk to it at a proper level. The difficulty that we're having is that that requires the people who write our DAW software and the people who write our audio drivers to do work in order to make that work with this thing. Is that it in a nutshell?
It's kind of a bumpy nutshell. So
It is. Smooth it
let
out
me give
for
you
us.
my angle on it. So uh, Windows, going way back to Windows NT, supported
Mm.
different processors. Like, it's the original kernel and stuff that was created was meant to work on some RISC processors as well as Intel processors and stuff. So that kind of code has always been, or that the architecture which made that work has always been part of Windows. And then back in 2012, I think it was 2011, when we released Windows 8. We released the Windows RT version, which was
Mm.
the version that was compiled for the 32-bit ARM processors of the time. And so the original Surface was the 32-bit ARM processor. It was actually by NVIDIA, and it was our take on a general tablet that you would use, as opposed to, say, like a productivity workstation. That was kind of where we're going for that. Then when you go forward to Windows 10, we started working on the stuff you said, which is like Surface Pro X, which was 64-bit ARM. But that was the older Qualcomm stuff, pre-Nuvia, purchase, where, I don't know if you know, but Qualcomm bought Nuvia. Nuvia was a startup that was created by ex-Apple engineers.
Okay.
And they created what's called the Orion core, and the Orion core is what's in the latest Snapdragon X CPU. So there's an interesting kind of story there for like the pedigree of where some of that stuff came from. Um, and we also, so we've got that stuff all working. In Windows 11, we have an emulation layer called Prism. And so any application that runs on Intel or AMD processors today, if it doesn't explicitly block installation on an ARM processor, it will typically install and run reasonably well. Now, I'm going to say reasonably well because for the average user, perfect. It's absolutely
Mm.
fine. But for folks that are working in a DAW where we're so performance sensitive that like any little kind of lapse in performance is hard for us. So in those cases, having a DAW run under emulation is going to limit what you can do with it. But for the vast majority of people, it's perfectly fine. We also have so you were talking about the drivers. Sorry, let me step back for a second. Drivers are something that run in the kernel in Windows, and so kernel mode stuff can't be emulated. So we can't have an Intel / AMD ASIO driver for, say, like a Focusrite device running on a Snapdragon X, because it needs to have a kernel mode component, and that kernel mode component has to be compiled for ARM. Same
Right.
thing when you go to Apple, like you have to compile your stuff there for ARM as well. It's not magic, especially when you start getting into the kernel side of things. It's really when you get up into user mode on both operating systems that there's an emulation layer. Now, on Windows, we also have another piece to that. And this is, sorry if this is too technical. I think this is, yeah, Jim, I also have a Surface RT kicking around here somewhere. They gave everybody at Microsoft a Surface RT at the time, which I thought was great. Um, so there we have this layer or this compilation target called ARM64 EC, which is emulation compatible. And what that lets you do is, if you are a user mode component, meaning a DAW or any other kind of application that runs kind of on the user part, not in kernel, uh, you can compile it for ARM64EC and get all the native performance of ARM. But then you can also load into your process Intel / AMD 64-bit binaries. Now, for us, that usually means a VST, right?
Mm.
So you can have your native version of Cubase running on that machine, and you don't have to go and buy new VSTs for everything. Like a lot of them are going to just work. Yes, you take a little bit of a performance hit because it is running under emulation, but most of our VSTs aren't as performance sensitive as we think. And it also will encourage companies to start building, for ARM64 as well when they start seeing these out there. But that's one thing that we've done a little bit differently here is we have this ability to. So yes, the actual drivers need to be native compiled to ARM. And the DAWs you do want to have native, right? But the plugins, you can slowly migrate those over time. You don't have to chuck your whole library. I mean, a lot of us have spent a lot of money in plugins.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I'm sure in the comments there are a few people who hoard plugins because I don't know what it is. It's like they're like modules. You just I don't know. People just buy them or get lots of free ones, and I'm the same way. So you can reuse all that stuff that you have there and still have it run on those devices.
I mean, that's interesting because one of the things you hear about the Apple experience is that they seem to be constantly going through this problem whenever there's an OS update that nothing works. None of their plugins work again, or you have the issue of Apple moving to their own silicon and that being a problem, and everyone having to hold back and be on some older OS on some older Mac system because none of their plugins will move to the new one. So are we sort of saying that on Windows this is actually a smoother ride?
So in theory, yes, it's a smoother ride. There are some things that they block. So let me give the caveats. If there are certain vector instruction sets that the plugin relies on for performance, like there are a few plugins that use this stuff out there, like the AVX instruction sets. Those are not emulated currently in the Prism emulator, so they'll work as though they were running on a processor that doesn't have that instruction set available. Second one is always the bane of everything I do, and I'm sorry if anybody who works there is in the chat, but iLok does not have an ARM64 version yet.
I have to say, I don't even know where my iLok is anymore. I got so fed up with it that every time I load up a new DAW or an update, I have to keep clicking all the quits and the cancels because all of these things come up looking for my iLok, and it's like, one of these days I will authorize my computer to have all these things on it. It's one of the most annoying things that was ever conceived, I find.
Yeah, and I get the necessity of it. The thing that always drives me nuts about it, though, is they have to do stuff that is unusual. I'll just say unusual is probably the best way to put it, because they don't want you to easily thwart the copy protection. That's what companies are paying them for, is to have as unbreakable as possible copy protection. But copy protection in general is just something I hate because it always gets in my way for all these things. It does. But yeah, we don't want to talk about that probably. So iLok, I know that they're working on some stuff here, so they will eventually support ARM64, but they need to be native because I think they install a kernel driver, as I recall, or they at least have code that's messing with things at that level to provide copy protection. And then if there's anything that actively blocks you from installing, like if the installer says, if ARM64, then don't install. So for example, Ableton Live does that right now. If something actively blocks you, then you can't get around it. But other than those three things, like you can use your VSTs, you can use the DAWs that we have. We had the 3 new native DAWs that we announced on Monday, which was or I should say 4 if you count Nuendo. It's not really a DAW, it's post-production, but Cubase, Nuendo, Reaper, and then Reason is going to be coming early next year, which is super fun. I know Reason has a great fan base of people who love using the rack extensions and stuff.
Yeah, I'm interested to hear. Well, interested that Bitwig is not in that list, because they have sort of proven themselves to be very on these kind of things and to be a very open format. Do you have any news on their development cycle at the moment?
So I'm a Bitwig user, so I would love to see them move over. So Claes, please move over. The best thing to do is for their customers, honestly, to pester them and say, hey, we want you on ARM, because they need to see the need from it for their customers, I think, before they would move over there, right? Steinberg folks already saw a need that they, and so did Reason and other folks, and Justin over at Reason has such a great code base for being able to move between all these different processors. Anyway, it wasn't a huge deal for him. And then I I don't think there's anything technically blocking Bitwig because they're C++ on the back end and Java on the front end, but um, there are some applications out there that are temporarily blocked. Like, for example, if you use FL Studio or you use Bremer's Multitrack Studio, both of those are written in Delphi, which doesn't have an ARM64 target for Windows yet. So we're talking with those folks to see if their compiler can put in an ARM64 target for Windows so that other people can move over.
Yeah, interesting. Do you see, I mean, at the moment, this is very much an open Windows system. I mean, with a previous incarnation, I think we were kind of reduced to Windows Store apps as
Right.
being
Yeah.
your main source of software, but that's not a thing
Correct.
on this.
No. So Windows RT was, like I said, it was that sort of attempt at, somebody will shoot me for saying this, but they wanted it to be an iPad, right? So everything comes from
Yeah.
the store and you get everything through there. And we saw how that went. So everything kind of since then, like we still have the store and it's a great place to get apps. It's just not required. This ARM64 Windows here is just like running on an Intel processor or an AMD processor. You have all the same rights and responsibilities and everything that you do on those.
Right. Great. I mean, I think most of us can appreciate the walled garden approach to a software hardware combination like the iPad. You know, that has worked out brilliantly, but I think that just doesn't work for everyone. I think there's lots of us that just we need a little bit more versatility. We need a little bit more control over our own destinies somehow. What I think is what Windows brings to the table pretty much when building a system.
Yeah, it's hard to start from a position of you can install anything you want anytime you want to know you can only install stuff from this one location. Like the reasons behind it were sound, where this was at a time when we were getting hammered constantly in the press where people were installing malware and there's all the shady sites for downloading apps and all that stuff, and people were just getting crap loads of really toxic stuff onto their PCs.
Yes.
And everybody was like, oh, Microsoft's full of viruses and all this stuff, and we're like, all right, we're gonna do something about that. You can only install apps in the store, they've been verified, etc. And everybody's like, no, we want our viruses, damn it. we want our malware. And I joke about that, but I completely understand that. So the important thing is, since then, if you are installing something from the store, they're no longer restricted the way they were about 12 years ago, right? So most any desktop application can be installed through the store, and it becomes a convenient way of just cataloging apps and knowing sort of where the latest ones are. So you're not going to, weird shady download site on the web to try to get that stuff. Not every company uses it, and that's fine. Again, it's the way Windows has been since day one. If you look on Mac OS, they have a store as well, but it's sort of the same thing where everybody is used to installing stuff from the usual sites, so they don't want to go to the store. So for simple things, it's worked out really well. For musicians, I have a MIDI SysX tool that's been in the store since forever, and it does really well in there. It's free and stuff, and I see the reports on it. Tons of people download it and use it every month. And then for people who don't want to download stuff from the store, that's fine.
Great. Well, before we forget, we should focus ourselves on the ASIO aspect of what we're talking about.
Oh yeah.
So the key to all of this, the thing that really got my attention, was that ASIO, which stands for various things, but we usually decide that it's audio system in out is the simplest way to
audio stream input output, I believe, is the official.
Oh no, my definition is definitely the one.
it's better. So here's a little here's anybody who watches the Qualcomm stream, they used an old slide for the MIDI one, and if you look underneath, it says MIDI 2.0, and then underneath it, it says musical instrument device interface instead of digital interface.
Oh dear.
And so, like, you're not the only one getting the acronyms
Yeah.
wrong.
Well, hopefully nobody's calling it the M1D1 interface. That's one we used to get in the music shops at times.
Right. Right.
Yeah. But so when we talk about ASIO, what we're essentially talking about is a driver architecture that bridges the gap between your hardware interface. I was going to put my hand on one, but I can't get one just now. Your
Yep.
box that you plug your microphone into and your guitars into, that and your software. It's the thing that connects those two things together. You can just plug a USB audio interface into your computer and it will work, but it will work with some quite generic multimedia drivers, which are probably fine for watching movies or playing back music, but not for the real-time performance that we need from hitting a keyboard and hearing a sound from software.
Yep.
Which is essentially the thing that we're after. We want to be able to play software sounds and monitor through our software, and that requires a super fast connection between our audio box and the DAW, and that has traditionally on Windows been supplied by an ASIO driver written by the manufacturer normally, and you plug in your device, you download the ASIO driver, and everything is gravy. So what is the news with
Right.
Windows ARM, because this has not been possible up to now?
Let me take one small step back and explain,
Yeah.
because a lot of folks one confuse ASIO and ASIO for all, which probably not your audience, but a lot of people do. And two, the reason for ASIO to begin with. So one, ASIO is an interface standard, if you will. It's a COM API that applications can use to speak to a hardware device, right? So it's actually an in-process DLL usually, and then there's a kernel driver that's behind it, and those two communicate with each other. ASIO for all uses that interface and is a layer on top of the rest of Windows Audio to provide an ASIO interface, as well as some other cool functions. It actually does some really good things for devices which don't have a native ASIO driver. So, for example, Behringer ships a bunch of stuff where for Windows they say just use ASIO for all, which made me a little sad to see.
Yeah.
But that was their, one, it's a cost savings thing for them, and two, it's a reasonable solution if you don't need super low latency audio. Now, why do we have ASIO on Windows to begin with? If you think about what it takes to do low latency and I'm going to talk just about Windows, and I'm not going to speculate as to how Mac does this internally, but when you have small buffers, which is what you need to have kind of low round trip latency, you need small audio buffers that are being serviced constantly. That means you're going to spend more CPU time filling those buffers and reading those buffers. So instead of, say, like a buffer of 1024, if you have a buffer of 64, you're going to be reading and writing way more times. Sorry, I'm not going to do the math in my head. Way more times for the 64 sample buffer than you would be for, say, 1024 buffer, right? So what that ends up meaning is, so that's more CPU time, which means more, the CPU is getting hotter. You're using more battery if you're on mobile, and the fans are running more if your CPU is getting hotter. So all those things sort of cascade together, where if you're an end user and all you want to do is you want to watch a movie, you don't need 64-bit sample buffers, or 64 sample buffers. You want your battery life to last as long as possible, and you don't want your fans running while you're watching that video, all that kind of stuff, right? So there's always this kind of fighting between, like, what do we do for the typical user who wants long battery life and isn't doing real-time audio stuff and doesn't need to do have a direct hardware interface, versus what musicians need, which is this: we want latency as low as humanly possible, and we don't care if we have to run an oil burner here to power our CPU to get this, so our samples
Yeah.
our sample buffers are as small as possible, right?
Yeah.
So ASIO gives you that other side of things where you can do that. The native Windows audio stack typically bottoms out at about 10 milliseconds of latency, because beyond that was the point where it really starts to interfere with a lot of other things that are going on in Windows, and folks weren't comfortable with having any sort of a switch to pop it below that, right?
I mean, one thing to consider, which I've always found helpful in thinking about this, is simply the massive range of PCs that are available.
Yeah.
The differences in quality of those bits of hardware. You've got computers that cost £100 from your local supermarket up to massive computers, and Windows has to run the lot and has to work on the lot. So
Yep.
when you think about running Windows Media Player, or playing Spotify or something of that nature, it has to be able to run on all of these crappy computers as well as very well put together ones.
Exactly.
And so it makes kind of sense that there's just a bit of space put in there so that the processor can go, oh heck, what the heck am I doing? Right, I'm playing music, and that's just an inevitability of being able to run on such a wide range of systems, rather than a very particular system like another company may.
There's and there are even some really inexpensive devices that have a delay of 1 millisecond or more just talking chip to chip on the motherboard, right? So they're like, when you start compiling all those things together, and yes, you need to work glitch free on all of those, then that's when you start getting into the situation that we're in. And Apple's done a fantastic, I don't take anything away from them. They've done a fantastic job integrating everything over there. On our side of things, and I'll get to the rest of ASIO in a second here, I've been talking to a lot of kind of high-end DAW companies, not just the ones that we announced here. And the universal feedback I get from them is that the Surface devices are the ones with the least problems for audio for them. And it's, so there is something to be said by having in-house front to back testing all the way through to do that. And that's, not, I don't make, well, I guess I technically, as a stockholder, I make something if I pimp Surface, but I just want to throw that out there as a feedback for real-time audio from some partners, right?
Yeah, I mean, that was totally the reason why I started doing a series of videos on the Surface. I mean, I started at the Surface Pro 3 because it seemed to be the point at which it was starting to get a hold of itself. And the idea was simply that it's made by Microsoft, it's running Windows. This, if any platform, as far as, because laptops, I mean, I was trying to sell laptops as a computer supplier and trying to find one that was actually going to work well, because laptops notoriously have things that get in the way of a USB connection working at its best, because it's trying to run at low power, it's trying to save battery, it's trying to turn things off all the time, which is the last thing you need when you're trying to do music. And so whenever I would find a laptop that I could use and could sell, it would then change and be something else, or not be available in the following month, or so it became such so difficult to find a consistent platform for doing mobile stuff on, like you could on a MacBook. And so when the Surface came along, it just seemed to be the most natural, perfect choice. It was perhaps a little bit more expensive, but it was than what your regular laptop would be. But it was certainly comparable to the MacBook in terms of power and features and pricing, and also loveliness. I mean, they were lovely devices, and I'm very much into the touch control, the pen. All of these creative elements that came along with it, I think was just really perfectly put together, and I still find that to be exciting, and I get excited about it. And I'm currently slightly frustrated, there's my 9, because the Surface Pro 11 is ARM, which again is what we're talking about. So currently I've got nowhere to go, but this is changing. So, yes, let's keep at it.
So let's talk about that. Sorry, there were 40 minutes into it and then finally getting to it. That's my fault. Sorry. So here's a. Let me make sure there's nothing on the screen that's gonna get me in trouble if I pop it up real quick. But nope, just a generic. Nope, don't log me in. Well, whatever. Okay. So before this, hurry up. Logs me in. This is yeah. All right. This is a Surface laptop 7, I think it is. Sorry, I should know all the branding and stuff. But this is Snapdragon based ARM 64. It's got 32 gigs of RAM in it. It's got a terabyte of drive space. Does really well. It's the same kind of stuff that we were using to demonstrate audio at Snapdragon Summit this week. And speaking of Snapdragon Summit, so what we did at there on Monday is we had a couple of keynote announcements. So I already mentioned the DAWs that are coming native to ARM 64, but we also announced MIDI 2.0, which will be in box in the insider builds next month, which I've talked about that in a million places before. Always happy to talk about it. And then probably the bigger announcement here is an inbox ASIO driver and new low latency USB audio class 2 driver. And so those are sort of they go together. So ASIO is the interface, right, that we want DAWs to use, and then there's the actual class driver below it, which means every application that gets plugged or every device you plug in that conforms to that class, which is essentially every USB audio device available today, will get picked up by that driver and be used by that driver. And the current intent is to replace our inbox driver that's there now with this new one, which gives us more knobs for somebody who is a musician to be able to lower the buffers. So it's going to have two different endpoints to it. One is regular Windows audio, through what's called WaveRT, which all the rest of Windows will use and all the typical users will use, and will support, all the scenarios we talked about, like media playback and stuff like that. And then there's the second interface into it, which is ASIO, which will give you the ability to request those lower buffer sizes, give you access to all the channels and all the inputs and outputs on those devices, which is something that you don't get through Wasapi today, and will be specifically for musicians. And we think by having this sort of dual-headed approach, it gets the typical consumer, who is a massive percent of the Windows user base, is completely unaffected. There's a new driver, but they won't see anything. But musicians now have a way that the minute they plug their device in, they will be able to instantly use it. They don't have to go someplace and download a driver or anything like that. And on ARM 64, like specifically Snapdragon right now, that's a problem because nobody until today, Steinberg just released their drivers today, but nobody until today had native ARM 64 drivers for their pro audio equipment available. So these just didn't work, right? So we've got three things total. So Steinberg released their native driver today, which you can still go download a driver and install it. That's perfectly fine. Focusrite is going to release their native drivers for ARM 64 early next year. Again, that gives you that option that if you don't want to use what we put in box, you can get an optimized one from Focusrite, just like you do. Like I have an RME interface coming from myself from my main rig here, and I know even on other platforms, they always write the drivers anyway. They prefer not to use the inbox stuff because they're experts at driver authoring and they can get those extra few milliseconds out. So you will always have that option on Windows, but now it's not required. You can just plug it in and have it work and not have to worry about, again, finding these drivers and installing them.
Yeah, I mean that's extraordinary news. I mean, in some ways the functionality is excellent, but it's also just the fact that it exists to the point that Microsoft is aware of our existence, and the operating system is aware that we wish to do these things, and we don't necessarily feel quite that we're trying to hack our way in, but there's actually a doorway now that we can move through where everything will be there. So, I mean, I have a few questions about the functionality of that ASIO. I mean, you've answered the one already about will all the inputs and outputs be available, because that was a key one. That was the difficulty with, sorry, hit my microphone. That was the difficulty with Wasapi, where you could see them, but you could only swap between stereo pairs, I think it was, which was which would be no good if you were trying to record 8 channels at once or play back through various things. So the next question that always comes up is, can you aggregate? Could you plug 2 things in and have them both revealed as available within a single piece of software?
So first of all, let me say that we are just starting this project. So this is really a 2025 thing that we're talking about. I would like to see us be able to aggregate devices, but I am definitely not going to promise that, especially for a version 1 of this. The underlying goal behind all this right now is to unblock ARM64 devices. So that's what we want to get to first. And we'll release this for Intel and AMD x64 devices afterwards, but ARM64 unblocking is kind of our top priority. I want to do things like aggregate devices. I'm just gonna say I want to do it. So if I can make it happen, I will. They will do some other things though. Excuse me, sorry. That a lot of a lot of ASIO drivers out there today don't do properly, like handle power management events to avoid audio glitching, of which a lot of drivers out there don't do properly today, and let you use Windows Audio and ASIO at the same time, which that's a requirement as well. We don't want it to be like, I don't know about other people, but a lot of times if I'm just like adjusting MIDI or messing with other stuff, a lot of times I'll have something else playing in another window that I want to listen to. And the Motu stuff I have today does that, but a lot of ASIO drivers don't do that. And so it's like, once you go in and use ASIO stuff, it shuts off all the other audio. So we have to support those.
Yeah. I mean, you
so that was a
sometimes
long-winded way of saying maybe. Absolutely don't take that as a promise. I recognize it as something that people would like to see us do. The other thing to keep in mind is this is like, we're still looking at what should we do long term for musicians for an audio API in Windows, because ASIO is not necessarily it. ASIO is, we know that all the applications today use it, so let's implement that properly on Windows and kind of meet everybody where they are, as opposed to this is our ultimate solution for all. This is our API that everybody should use for music going forward. That's not necessarily the case. It's more that this is where we know we're going to get the most bang for the buck in the short term and unblock as many people as possible.
Yeah, I mean, I remember there being something called Copper LAN, I think it was, a while ago, which had this kind of unique way of giving you a matrix way of connecting everything that was connected to your computer to each other and over networks. There are technologies out there which go further than ASIO ever has. I mean, ASIO has been around since ridiculous ago,
97 or something, 96, yeah.
Long time ago. So it's very much an aged thing that is, I mean, in many ways it's just because no one's
it works really well.
better. Like, it does. Yeah, it does. It does.
Its power is the simplicity of it, where it does something simple and it does it really well.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the problems that you have when you're trying to run it with other bits of software at the same time is you get sample rate conflictions, where you have your DAW, for instance, running in 48K, or actually usually the other way around, funnily enough. Windows tends to default to 48K, I found. Sound Blaster cards are always 48K, I seem to remember. And then you're running your DAW in 44.1, you then have this, the sound card, the audio interface can't necessarily cope with that.
Right.
Also, I mean, the other question was, many years ago, I had a Soundscape card, and that had multi-client ASIO drivers, in that it could run different ASIO applications simultaneously, each using sort of a different part of that same audio interface's ASIO driver, which then turned up as a channel within its internal mixer. I wonder whether that's a thing that I've not really seen it since, to be fair, and I wonder if that's a thing that's on the cards.
It's so weird that ASIO today, excuse me, tends to be just one-to-one, where it's one application using one device and that's it. Like, excuse me, I still don't understand why we couldn't load multiple ASIO drivers into an application at the same time and use multiple devices, or, like there are certain limitations that, and it's probably just my ignorance of how some of the internals are implemented on a lot of the devices, like why we couldn't do that. Could also be that, if you're company A making a device, do you want to go out of your way to make it easy for somebody else to also be able to use company B's device at the same time? And it's probably not worth your time.
Hmm.
So there are things that we can look at that other people really aren't in a position to be able to look at for long term. But again, for the first version of this that we release, it's going to provide the kind of ASIO experience that you would expect today, with a couple of things that I had mentioned, and just inbox and handling the power management and stuff like that properly.
Yeah. Does
Not
it?
really extra features or something.
Okay. I do recall there was some mention of loopback. Is that was that referencing audio or
That's
referencing
MIDI, I
MIDI?
think.
Oh, okay.
Yes. So really quickly, the MIDI, the Windows MIDI services stuff that we're putting out is, um, so first of all, again, it'll be an insider build starting next month. It has built-in ability to do MIDI loopback, so that anybody can create loopback endpoints and use them, and you can use them for simple application to application MIDI. Then it has support for what's called a MIDI 2.0 virtual device. So an application can present itself as a virtual MIDI 2.0 device, which is more complicated than a MIDI 1.0 device, because it has to be able to do protocol negotiation and discovery and a bunch of other things that are part of MIDI 2.0, but that's built into the API. Um, Working on sort of the virtual patch bay functionality that won't be in version 1, but it'll be in the version shortly afterwards. And then it has everything's multi-client. I should mention that's our biggest request, is multiple devices using it at the same time, and it's a hell of a lot faster than our current MIDI 1.0 code.
That's MIDI 2.0. I mean, it's a funny old thing, because it's so hard to visualize. I mean, we've heard a lot about it for sort of 4 or 5 years now, I suppose, and it sounds exciting. It sounds like it could be awesome, but the so when it sort of comes down to somebody giving you a demo, you actually don't really notice that it's any different to anything you've kind of experienced before. I think in some ways it needs a big wow moment. That at some
Mm-hmm.
point there's going to be an application, or there's going to be a connection, or when it becomes commonplace, we'll plug in our keyboard and we will be impressed by what happens with that, or we won't notice it at all, which
Right.
might be the same sort of thing, because we've
So,
become so accustomed to a certain way of things working that yeah, I think many of us are yet to have the eureka moment of what MIDI 2.0 will offer.
the real eureka moment so first of all, the new stack fully supports MIDI 1.0 and MIDI 2.0, just so people know. So almost all my devices here are MIDI 1.0 devices. The eureka moment for people was at NAMM a couple of years ago, where the keyboard standing up behind me here, left from right, there
I
we
know.
go.
I can't do that.
The keyboard standing up behind me is our Roland A88, which has it's a piano action controller that has MIDI 2.0 support. People played that at NAMM, and they flipped the switch between MIDI 1.0 mode with 127 levels of velocity, and MIDI 2.0 mode, which had 16,000 levels of velocity or whatever. And for a piano player, that was they immediately understood what was happening, and it was a wow moment for them.
Oh,
But you
great.
can't demo it,
Yeah.
because we had a demo on the stage where somebody was like, look at all this cool stuff, and it was an amazing demo. But if you're not the person playing it, you're like, okay, it's
Mm.
somebody playing a piano just like any other person playing a piano. It's really about that feel and the expression at that point. So that's a big part of it. There's also, like, people have been upset for Windows MIDI device names for like the longest times, because we seem to get that wrong more often than we get right. MIDI 2.0 lets a device tell you its name properly. Like, it's not read. the way it is with USB today, you read it from this place, and if it's not in this place, you need to go check this place, and if it's not in that place, then you got to go check this pin, and you need to. There's like 4 different places in a USB device descriptors where you end up trying to find a name from. MIDI 2.0. So I've got a Montage M off screen over here on the side that has a full MIDI 2.0 implementation, and it tells me, "Hi, I'm a Montage M, and here's my serial number." Right, so I don't have to like guess at those names. They come through properly. And then if users rename them on the device, which I think some devices support renaming, I'm not sure if the Montage does, that's the name that we show in Windows as well. So I mean, it's a lot of like little delighters like that I think are a big deal. And then there's just um I think another one that's gonna get people interested is where the network MIDI 2.0 standard is now complete, and it's going into
Good.
voting, right? Um, network MIDI 2.0 is MIDI over UDP, and it's super fast, and it has good error recovery and stuff. I'll have a demo of that in our Windows stack at NAMM in January for how that works. That I think is going to become another killer moment for MIDI 2.0 because it's a hell of a lot nicer protocol than RTP MIDI.
Right.
And as soon as it has support across all the operating systems, I think that it'll probably become more important than USB over time for MIDI.
Oh,
Especially when
interesting.
you deal with USB, like USB cables, they get more like you can do more and more with them, but the cables keep getting shorter and shorter and shorter until eventually it's going to be a cable like this big, and that's what you have to use to plug stuff in. Network doesn't have those types of limitations.
Yeah. Oh, see, that's interesting. It's interesting um, how we hang on to these old connections and how useful they are, and how quickly we move into something which we think is new, which then turns out to be not as
Yeah.
useful as we thought. I mean, all the small MIDI USB connections have always been a frustration, you know.
So
Finally,
think about having a box. I don't know how, like most studios and stuff, they have devices now that are more than 6 feet away.
yeah,
If once you route a cable, which is roughly the distance you get with USB 3 point whatever it is. Imagine a little box that's just network connected, and it has a bunch of USB MIDI connections on it, so you can go and stick that 100 feet away or on the other side of a room or whatever, and all you have to route is a network cable over there.
mm,
So that's
yeah,
something that you'd be able to do over network MIDI.
yeah. Oh, that's nice. Yeah, we like that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm excited about it. There's and really it was just it's more than just MIDI 2.0. MIDI 2.0 gave us a good reason to completely rewrite our MIDI stack from the ground up and do some things the way that we thought we should have done them, because it hadn't been touched since like 1999 otherwise. And so I think there's a lot of stuff here that folks are going to be like, well, duh, of course it should do that, but didn't
yeah.
realize that we didn't do it 6 months ago, but now we have it.
Yes. Well, that's part of it's part of the struggle I think of MIDI 2.0 is that we just kind of assume that these things already happen when they don't, and you forget the struggle. I mean, I do a lot of reviews of MIDI controllers, and every time I'm tearing my hair out over the how to get the thing installed and working to start with, because if you're a normal person, you'd buy one MIDI controller, you'd install it, have a bit of a, oh, I don't quite know what I'm doing, but then you'd carry on, you'd get it working, and you'd forget about that little struggle you had. Whereas I'm
Mhm.
regularly having that struggle time and time again, and getting annoyed at Novation and Arturia about their lack of care when it comes to poor new users trying to get this thing to work. And the day I plug something in and Windows just goes, here it all is going to be, quite something. I'm quite looking forward, quite looking
Yeah.
forward to that.
And
Um,
we're it seems like we've been talking about, or I've been talking about MIDI 2.0 forever, because I kind of have. It's the reason is this is sort of the other edge of the sword when you're developing it in the open, and because we
mm,
developed everything on GitHub for this, and then we've pulled it into Windows, folks have been able to see really the start date when we started working on it, and then all the little updates since then. So I think a lot of the companies have been waiting, especially the ones in Japan, for Windows to have the new stuff built in before they're willing to really release these devices, because innate. I know a lot of folks see Mac for music production over here in the US and in parts of Europe, but if you go to Asia, China and Japan and stuff like that, it's still mostly PC,
Mm,
mostly Windows, and they need to have the support built in for them to be able to release these products.
yeah. No, I think that's right. It's such a large user base. Um, and in many ways, we're the people who need the help the most. Because we're any old idiot can use a PC, whereas people who buy an Apple, they know what they're doing apparently, and so don't need the help. I always
Maybe.
think maybe,
Yeah. It's all
yeah,
good. And, I'm sure Apple will end up implementing some of these standards. They already have MIDI 2.0 in box. They beat us to that. But the network MIDI stuff, I suspect they'll have in box pretty soon as well, because they're part of the MIDI Association. They support a lot of the standards and stuff there. And it's nice for us to all work together and have things that'll be able to talk to each other. Have a good way for being able to use your iPad as a MIDI controller for a synth that's running on Windows or something like that, or vice versa, being able to use your Surface as a MIDI controller for something that you're running on the Mac, and just have
mm,
that just work the way it should work.
yeah, yeah. I mean, other things like not having to run a host to run multiple VST instruments. I mean, presumably that's going to be uh, an easier way if you've got multi-client MIDI, but then also that requires, I guess, multi-client audio. Ooh, I don't know.
Yeah,
So, yeah,
the host is usually about isolation, or if you have really big like orchestral libraries and you're using like Vienna Ensemble or something
yeah,
on a different PC. Um, so that yeah, those are trying to solve for different problems, and they'll still happen. The DAWs really now are coming through with how they handle MIDI 2.0 and stuff in the future, because some standards like VST they don't pass the MIDI messages directly to the plugins, but they do have to translate the types of things that MIDI is doing to what gets sent to the plugins. Now, luckily, VST already has high resolution messages and all that kind of stuff anyway. So I think it'll be a no-brainer for most plugins to support this. You won't have to run a host just for that. Like that stuff will just be built in.
nice.
Yeah. And all this, so the ASIO stuff we're looking at next year for inbox, or looking at next year for some previews, I should say, for ARM64 and then eventually for X64. MIDI 2.0, again, the highly technical folks will have previews in Insider Builds next month for all of Windows MIDI services. And that includes our backwards compatibility for WinMM, which is the API most applications use. Actually, if people look it up here on YouTube, I have a video that's called like multi-client WinMM Windows MIDI surfaces, some completely unsearchable name like that, which shows the backwards compatibility work, and how by just having Windows MIDI services installed, even if none of the applications know how to talk to the new API, you get multi-client as just for free, because it's part of the way that we've set up the routing and stuff in there. So that'll start showing up in Insider Builds next month. Like I said, Steinberg already released all their products today. Focusrite will have their stuff early next year. Reaper released their stuff on Monday. I mean, there's a lot going on in this space
Mm,
that we announced that is really kind of coming together, and it's all years and years of work, both by these companies as well as from Microsoft. So,
yeah. So, I mean, you glossed over something there, which I think is worth mentioning, which is that we've been talking about Windows 11 on ARM, so on these new Snapdragon processors and that kind of thing. But all of this technology is going to make it to your regular Intel box as well. So
yep.
it's not that this is exclusively going to be on ARM based Windows systems. This is also going to filter through to regular Windows on everything. But it's just
Yep.
the next thing that you're going to do. It's not the thing you're doing at the moment.
Yeah, it's and most of the code for the UAC2 driver and ASIO and stuff is going to be the same for ARM and for Intel and AMD. So we're not anticipating a lot of work there, but we do want to focus on the ARM stuff first. The Windows MIDI services is compiled for ARM and compiled for Intel and AMD every time we do a build. So that's immediately available for both
Right.
whenever we have that out. It's really just the ASIO driver stuff that will have a little bit of lag for the Intel piece, because nobody on Intel, I say nobody who's not using a device that tells you to use ASIO for all or something as its driver is blocked on those today, but they are blocked
Mm.
on ARM. So we want to make sure we get that going.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. So when we talk about these, I mean, do you have any sense at all of how the Surface Pro 11, for instance, compares to the Intel version, the Surface Pro 10 or Surface Pro 9? Is there any easy way to compare in speed performance that will be
Yeah,
relevant or helpful in any way?
sure. I'm not gonna talk about benchmarks because that'll land me in jail, I'm sure. And also, I don't know them, so I'm just not the right person for that. What I do know is that the battery life on um, my Surface laptop here, which is again the new Snapdragon based stuff, is like way out of scale with anything I was getting on other laptops in the past, right? So this is like 20 hours of battery life or something crazy like that. And I'm not, you always have to take those numbers with a grain of salt. I'm
Absolutely,
doing
yeah.
with these, I'm doing a mix of all sorts of different stuff, right? A lot of times the numbers that you see quoted for different devices out there are, yes, if you watch streaming video for 20 hours, it's going to last 20 hours because everything's offloaded to a coprocessor that knows how to do the video decode, right? It's really, what do you, what are you doing? I'm doing normal email, I'm doing Visual Studio stuff, I'm doing compiling, I'm doing presentations, I'm doing MIDI testing and stuff. I can leave this thing without plugging it in for quite a long time. And so to me, that's one of the biggest ones. And I don't hear it.
Mm.
And it's like, so Robin, I'm getting old. Right. And so carrying around like a massive laptop is not that interesting. At home, I'm on a desktop. I love my huge screen and that's just the way I like working. But when I'm traveling, I don't want to carry around like a huge laptop and a huge power brick and stuff anymore because it kind of wrecks my
Mm.
back over time running through the airport. So this one, the laptop doesn't weigh a whole lot and it has a really small power adapter. Just it's basically the same one that you see with the Surface,
Right.
the actual Surface, the tablets, as opposed to the laptops and stuff. And so those are really the big things. As far as performance goes, to me, I don't notice anything like different or worse in terms of speed from other laptops I've used in the past. Right? It does everything that I throw at it, and that's probably the best way for me to judge it.
Great, yeah. And the other factor that gets thrown up when non when non us sort of people are talking about this new range of laptops is Copilot, and I don't know how helpful I don't know how helpful that is. I mean, Copilot is the AI assistant essentially within Windows, if I understand that right, and within this range of Snapdragon laptops, because they're not just Microsoft ones, they're also made by other companies as
Yep.
well. It's been sort of opened up for OEMs and such like to build their own systems on it. But within that comes this new processor, this AI processor that runs those sorts of tasks. Is that
Yep.
something that's of remote any interest to us whatsoever? Do you think?
Yeah. So you're talking about the NPU.
That's right.
And then Copilot is a term that is a little bit overloaded. Like these are called Copilot plus PCs
Yeah.
because they meet the requirements for that. Um, whether or not the Copilot, assistant or agent or however you want to talk about that is helpful to you, I think is going to depend upon you. But there is a whole stack of other things that come with this as part of what's called the Windows Copilot runtime, which is our support for running AI models directly on the device without impacting battery life and with having like pretty good performance, right? Um, and so I think a lot of people don't realize how much AI they might be running in their DAWs today already. There
Mm.
are a number of audio cleanup and stem separation and deconvolution and a bunch of other things that happen in DAWs, which are really AI based, and they're running these models behind the scenes. And today, a lot of them are running right on the CPU, which is a drain on battery life, for one, and also tends to run a little bit slower than on something like the NPU. And so part of part of what we're trying to do with these devices for music is, once we've got the bases covered, all the basic stuff, is talk to these companies who are running these AI models in their DAWs and say, hey, here's how you can accelerate it on these different Copilot Plus PCs or things with an NPU using what we have called DirectML underneath, which kind of abstracts away what you're running it on so that you can use the best thing for running that model at that time. And talk to them about doing that so that they can have an even better experience on these devices.
Nice. Nice. Well, that's good. That's comforting because, you know, it gets a little bit mystical. I mean, when I came to, because I've been upgrading my Surface every time a new one comes along, in order to do videos on the audio performance and make music on it, and just because it's a fabulous thing to do. As I say, I have the Surface Pro 9. When I came to find the Surface Pro 10, I found that it had not really, it wasn't something that was available to me. It's something that only appeared in education or in business accounts,
Right.
things, and everything had jumped to this Windows, to the Surface Pro 11, with this Copilot stuff all attached, and talking about it had to download the internet into itself, and you couldn't use half the hard drive because that was running things. And it's like, I don't know if any of this is remotely usable, let alone the fact that the processor had completely changed. And so all of the usual tests and stuff that I would be running on a system, I don't even know if any of those are relevant. It's really interesting. But at this particular point, all I could really understand was that I don't think it's quite ready for what I need to do on it yet. So I'm hanging back and waiting until there's more stuff to test and more stuff to look into. So certainly with the ASIO stuff that's coming on, that is fascinating, and that, as you say, that will open it up to everything, because that's been the roadblock up until now. And so there's sort of little point in me doing videos on it at this point, because things will only run, most stuff will run in an emulated mode. We have now Cubase and stuff that we could run natively, but I'm not going to be able to see the proper performance until we have the ASIO driver, which is going to be able to provide that connection to the real world ultimately. But it looks like, I mean, time wise, you say 2025, sort of next summer. Are we looking for the inbox one, would you say?
So previews are probably around mid-year. Let me caveat that with previews when we feel like it's ready to preview, but that's probably around mid-year. It always gets me in trouble with customers because I'm very much want to release things based on quality as opposed to hitting a specific date on things, which, I don't know, it's a bit of a pain in the ass for some people to have to deal with when they're trying to make plans, but I don't want to release something crappy. But around mid-year is when we expect to start having previews available for people, which will probably require a manual install. Hey, here's the package with the driver, try it out and install it. And you manually assign it to a device, which is the way the MIDI driver works today. It's how it has to work before it becomes a class driver. And then so Yamaha is the one actually building the most of this driver. They're the one that is working with us in Qualcomm on this, and so they'll turn that over to us near the end of the year, and then we go through and go through all the process of bringing it in box, running it through the final quality tests, and then making it into a class driver and then releasing it in Windows for everybody. Usually we try to do some insider build stuff before then, but we'll have to see. It gets fuzzier as we get closer to the end of that.
Yeah. So does Steinberg and Focusrite, will they have their drivers out before then?
Yeah. So Steinberg's out today.
Okay.
So if you have the IX something or IXO, I forget the particular device that they have.
Yeah, I have that.
Those are the same ones that we were using at Snapdragon Summit for all the demos with Dom and Cooper. So that's available today. There's a press release over on the Steinberg site. Focusrite stuff for their in market things will start super early next year. And so everybody with I you would have to check with them as to which specific devices roll out first. I assume they're going to start with some of their high end Gen 4 stuff, but that's really up to them for how they release that. But
I'm
that'll
sure
start
it'll be
becoming
an
available early next
excuse
year.
for them to do yet another new version of the
Nah,
same
they just
interface.
Nah, they just did Gen 4, which is a super nice one. And it's also has here's one of the reasons why
Oh yeah,
somebody might want to use the vendor specific driver is all their Gen 4 stuff also comes with a companion application which does a lot of other things with the device. And so
yeah.
they'll have all that stuff out for ARM64 early next year.
Okay. Yeah, cool. I mean,
We
because
should,
that is a big factor. I mean, for instance, I use an SSL12 USB audio interface, which has a really nice application that runs monitoring and mixing and loop back and all sorts of other bits and pieces.
nice.
Those are
I
very
finally
useful.
I finally because my Motu interface here, as I've been running a PCIe 424 with a
Right.
bunch of these breakout boxes
Yeah.
forever. I've had it.
Yeah.
It's old,
Rock solid.
but they have a that these 24 IO interfaces that I have, and I have at times had 96 inputs running at the same time just for testing and because why not?
Yeah.
Um, the they have a clock rot that happens. There's like a chip in there that's responsible for clock sync that over time, and these are old, right?
Mm.
But over time they kind of die, and so mine have finally started dying, and so I bought an RME, what's it, MADI Face FX PCIe one that's got 300 or whatever inputs supported on it. So that's coming soon, and I got a Ferrofish uh, the breakout box for it that does all the DB25 stuff. So I have to replumb everything in here,
Well, that'll
but
do it though. You know,
it's a lifetime purchase.
yeah,
So it's the Army stuff is really good,
it
and
is.
I
Yeah.
was like, if I'm going to buy another one, I'm going to get like a really good one. I
No,
asked
fair enough.
so Vin, I got that. So I do a podcast with Vin
Door bench
Corleano. I
fin,
always mispronounce his last name. What's that?
door bench fin.
Yep, the yes, Dawbench Finn. So I do a
Yeah,
podcast with him, and I
excellent.
asked him, dude, which interface do you think I should get that's the best here? And he spec'd it out for me. He's like, this is what you want, and this is your lifetime purchase. So I went and did that.
Yeah,
So thanks, Finn.
yeah. He's doing good work. Has done for decades. That's
I need to
a
somehow
slog.
get him. I need to get him a Snapdragon device somehow, but he's down there in Australia, which,
Yeah.
that's like no man's land for getting equipment to or anything like that. Because I want him to do Dawbench stuff on Snapdragon here, and once these drivers start coming out, like let's see how this actually works.
Yeah. No, fair enough. Yeah. No, well, this has been really interesting. It's been really helpful for my thought process in trying to work out where we are with this, and it's also exciting stuff. I love the fact that Microsoft are interested in this. I love the fact that there's development happening that's going to make our life easier. You know, I haven't been able to get excited about MIDI 2.0 yet, and I'm starting to think that maybe I could. I
We'll
think,
get you there. We'll get you
yeah,
there.
yeah. I think NAM could be interesting for that this year. I think
Yeah,
that's this could be the one that's going to help with that.
I think
But
so.
yeah, good things coming. I think.
I'm looking, and Jim had asked if Network MIDI will be part of MIDI services. The timing of it, I don't think the spec will be fully released when we release the first version of Windows MIDI services, so we can't release the component at that time, but we'll follow on very quickly afterwards.
Yeah,
I'll have a fully working version at NAM in January. I'll leave it that way.
excellent. Is there anything that we haven't talked
I'm
about
just
that
trying to
we
see
that
if
we
there's
needed to
anything
talk
in
about?
we talked about a ton of stuff. Oh, you know what? There's one other thing I forgot to mention about the MIDI stuff because this always comes up as a request too. But the other thing that we added in there is message scheduling. So if you are using the new API, this doesn't backport over to the old stuff like multi-client does. But if you're using the new API, we have timestamp based message scheduling, which is something that's been asked for a long time. And also all the incoming messages are also time stamped as well. And the resolution on that is like 100 nanoseconds, I think, or something for the timestamp itself.
Will MIDI aux get an upgrade? I mean, that's what we all want to know.
So MIDI aux is funny because it was one of my test cases here, and they use an ancient 32-bit library
I'm sure they
for
do.
talking to MIDI, which means it doesn't talk to anything I have in my dev builds, and we can only test it really once we have it in box. And we also have a 32-bit version of our um, uh, not our MIDI service, but the audio endpoint builder or something. I forget exactly which thing we need in there to try that out. Hopefully that'll work. But the tools that I'm providing as part of MIDI services also does sysx dumps. It does sysx loading. You can send and receive files of that stuff. You can monitor any of the inputs that are coming in. Like there's a console tool that a lot of the developers have been using that I created as part of this that does most of the things that you would do with something like MIDI aux. And then there's a settings tool, which will come shortly after the first one, that does all the other stuff that somebody who doesn't want to drop to the console
Hmm.
will want to do.
Yeah.
Right.
So, I mean, is
So
there going to be
yeah,
lovely
it'll probably
graphical
work.
ends? Yeah.
Yeah, it'll probably work, but no offense to the people who created MIDI aux, but I'd like to make it unnecessary to use. Like I would
Well,
like to have all the stuff
that's
in
nice. I
box.
mean, in some ways, little applications like ASIO for All and MIDI aux have been so helpful to us over the years
Hmm.
as these little applications that, written by people in sheds. I'm a
Yeah,
funny one to talk.
like the
That have
Bluetooth
just been
MIDI stuff
extraordinary.
and the things that Tobias Eriksson have created, like
Yeah.
all of those have gotten us through, I would say, the dark times. All of those have gotten us through years and years. But my intention is to fully make all these things redundant.
Yeah. Great. Well, I'm all for that. Yeah, we
Yeah,
need to set up some kind of memorial for these old fellas.
I
But
think so. They have done amazing work over the
yeah,
years in and like there's no shade against them at all. It's just they
yeah,
were doing things that we should have done years ago, but we're finally getting around to doing now.
yeah. Fantastic. Well,
Cool.
I think we've probably covered it. I think that's
I think
probably
so.
enough. I understand that there'll be a few articles about this sort of thing knocking around in time over the next couple of months, and probably on the lead up to
Yep.
NAMM as well, which is great because I think is exciting stuff. I will try to reach out to my local Microsoft man to see if I can get some kind of idea of when I could get
Yeah.
my hands on one too. When I have, because FC
Definitely try
Focus,
these
right,
out. So
and it's Cubase. Yeah.
there's even a limited edition version of this that instead of 32 gigs of RAM, it comes with 64.
Oh,
And like there's once you get 64 gigs of RAM in there, like I don't think there's anything that you can't do at that point.
yeah.
We'll
Yeah.
start seeing more orchestral works from you, Robin.
Yeah. Maybe. I
Maybe.
mean, maybe. Although, I mean, I'm going to be completely consumed because I'm just reviewing Studio One 7 at the moment, Presonus, and they snuck in a CV instrument that they haven't told anybody about. It's just sitting there, and you're going, "What's that?" And
Hmm.
it's CV out of Studio One directly through your audio interface. So I'm going to spend all of my
Nice.
time now working on that. I imagine trying to get it to
Nice.
work because I haven't done so far. Can I get it to calibrate? No, I cannot. But that's trickier than one would
You're going to
imagine.
create all the LFOs through, I think is what it is. You're going to hand draw all of them, and that's going to be your next
Yeah,
stream.
yeah, maybe because they do. I mean, yeah, Studio One. Although it's it's my one ish first choice ish.
Hmm.
It does have some things that are missing. It's like what I love about Bitwig is its ability to just generate stuff. You can turn on an LFO and you can send it to MIDI, you can send it out CV, you can route
Yep.
it to all sorts of things. And Studio One just doesn't have that. And it's like, oh, come on, just give us an ability to modulate would be fantastic. And it's got this CV instrument which just has pitch and gate. And it's like, oh, come on. Because I can
Yep.
draw in some automation. I can draw sine waves on the track. If I could send that out or something, that would be superb. But they're trying something out, and we'll see where it goes from there.
All right.
That's a bit of an
Well,
aside.
Robin, thank you for having me on.
You're welcome.
I really appreciate it. I'm looking at the chat. Folks seem to be happy with what they've seen here. If they have questions, I'm all over the internet, so people can ask me questions wherever. And if not, they should just comment on your video on the channel, I would think, Robin, right?
Yeah, most definitely. And I'm sorry about our start. I've now got like half a dozen different videos up on the channel. I will tidy that up so that only hopefully this one will exist and you can ask us questions on here if you have any. And I will of course keep my fingers on the pulse to find out how this progresses, and we will watch with much interest, no doubt. So
Cool.
yeah, that'll do us, I think. Thank you, Pete. That's been great.
Thank you.
And thanks everyone in the chat. I don't have anything particular to add at this point that I could think of. No, we're in heading towards the end of the month. I will see you for the Molten Monthly at the end of October. Next week, oh heck, that means I've got to do that next week, I imagine. There's been a load of stuff coming out recently. It's been slightly overwhelming. So yeah, I'll get stuck into that, and
Yes,
I will
Cord
see you then.
put out a new synth last night.
I know.
And actually, it looks fantastic. I was looking, I was like, damn, that sounds pretty good.
Yeah. Well, it looks very much like my mod wave I've got sitting there.
Oh, yeah, they're all that same form factor, but I was kind of yeah, anyway, yeah, I'm not going to start another hour of discussion here. It looks
Yes.
like what it's not, but it actually sounds pretty good.
Yeah. Interesting, fascinating stuff. All right, thank you. I will hit the button then, and we will disappear. And thanks in the chat. Thanks everyone who's out there. And you go and take care of yourselves and go and make some tunes. Thanks, Pete. I'll speak to you in a minute. Cheers.